It's hard to say how my dad hasn't shaped me as a person.
I met Reggie Whitten in 1980 in a courtroom where we were both lawyers representing co-defendants in a case. And Reg always says he met me and realized this Jim Priest is kind of a smart aleck. I like him. And I felt the same way about Reg.
When I got called to Governor Henry's office to meet Reggie, he said, I want you to meet Reggie. I want you to know that this gentleman is going to spend the rest of his life fighting for Oklahomans who are struggling with this disease, to prevent this disease, to make sure this doesn't happen to one more child. And that was over 15 years ago.
Fate is fighting addiction through education. For the last 21 years, my dad has been traveling the state and telling Brandon's story to our youth. My brother was driving a motorcycle. He had been drinking and he took opiates. My father called him. He knew that Brandon was on some substance and said, I'm going to come get you. Don't get in your vehicle. At this time, Brandon is trying to race home and beat Dad home. He makes it into the neighborhood and wrecks into our neighbor's mailbox.
When Brandon had his accident that proved to be a fatal accident, I got a phone call asking if I could go up to the emergency room. So I went up thinking I would be there to comfort Reg and try to be a support. And when I walked in the emergency room, Reg was on his knees next to a friend of Brandon who had been with Brandon. And Reg had his arm around this young man who was sobbing, giving comfort to him.
It's not easy to repeat, but he's given thousands of these speeches across the state. He relives the worst night of his life all the time, and not for himself, but for others.
One of the things I would be remiss if I didn't mention was the creation of Arcadia Trails through Integris Health. It is a national model for evidence-based, cutting-edge treatment practices. I brought together Reggie Whitten, Kelly Dyer-Fry, whose son has struggled, and she's been very open about her fight in addiction, and Dr. Murali Krishna, one of our state's leading, if not the leading expert in the area of brain health from the medical side. Together, we worked with Dr. Julio Rojas and created a model that is now known as Arcadia Trails. It's an incredible treatment center that provides life-saving services.
I think most people, when they think about addiction, particularly opioid addiction, they think that's somebody else's problem. And it's everywhere. Everybody is vulnerable.
Oklahoma was the first state in the nation to take Johnson & Johnson to trial for what they did, and we won. And we won because of the work of Reggie Whitten. We won because they spent years, and I mean years, pulling documents, interviewing witnesses, figuring out what and really how disgustingly deep the opioid crisis was in terms of creation by manufacturers who simply wanted to make a profit, who knew that the more families they got addicted, the more money they would make. It was a landmark trial, the first in the nation. It paved the way for Oklahoma to recover millions and millions of dollars to address the opioid crisis in our state, and it paved the way for other states to follow this model, to be successful in obtaining dollars to try to abate the opioid crisis in their state as well.
During the opioid trial and the settlement with Purdue, my dad was instrumental in getting 50,000 genetic samples from Purdue.
Because of the work of Reggie Whitten and his law partner, Mike Burridge, Purdue provided a settlement to the state of Oklahoma that allowed us to create the National Center for Wellness and Recovery, focused exclusively on research, prevention, and treatment of opioid addiction. As part of that prevention and because of that settlement, Purdue Pharma has the largest sample of basically blood samples of patients who were taking opioids. They collected this biological information and samples for decades. Nobody else has this kind of research and nobody else ever will.
They were just gonna throw it away. These are addiction samples that are priceless. You can't recreate these 50,000 genetic samples.
Research is being done right now in Oklahoma on how to create pain medication that's non-addictive.
Oklahoma has leading science in addiction, and that's because of my dad.
I think the word that I would speak to families is that it can happen to you. You're a family that doesn't deal with addiction issues, you haven't had that kind of exposure, don't think you're immune.
When you ask what are the common characteristics of families impacted by addiction, it's almost every family. So it's hard to say there are common things. It's 1 out of every 4 Oklahomans that struggle with mental health and addiction. It affects every single one of us.
That's why it's important for all of us to support organizations that provide support to families and individuals struggling with addiction. It's a community issue, and it gets real personal when it hits your family.
People will reach a breaking point where they've tried rehabs, they've tried every single option imaginable, and they're at the end of the rope thinking that there's no hope, and they drop their kids off at my dad's doorstep. Reggie's the last stop for somebody who has no hope.
There's a lot of things in public for which he gets appropriate credit and acknowledgement, most of which he would rather not have. He says he's part of a club that nobody wants to join. But for all that out front stuff that he does, he probably does even more behind the scenes quiet stuff that nobody ever hears about.
I would say that Reggie honors Brandon every day, trying to make sure this doesn't affect one more family.
So Reg, I just want to congratulate you. Wow, and it's too small a word to express all that I'm feeling right now, but to congratulate you on receiving this very first inaugural Heal Out Loud award. This is well deserved. Thanks for being my friend. Thanks for being a friend and a hope giver in our state.
When you heal out loud, you help other people. You make sure that they don't feel alone, that this isn't a loss that only you have faced or only your neighbor has faced. This is a loss that connects us all as Oklahomans, as Americans. It's something that's running rampant through our country right now. The COVID epidemic has only made the opioid epidemic that much worse. And so when you heal out loud and you speak out loud about your loss, you could prevent another family from losing their loved one.